Alan Jackson has never been just another voice on the radio. He rose as a witness to ordinary lives, a steady current carrying stories of love, faith, and loss through generations of Americans who saw themselves reflected in his songs. With melodies that felt lived in rather than manufactured, he turned everyday truths into lasting anthems. Songs meant not to impress, but to endure. From Chattahoochee to Remember When to Where Were You, his music did more than climb charts. It stayed. It sat beside people in their kitchens, their trucks, their quiet moments, and their grief. Over more than 4 decades, Alan Jackson stood as a pillar of country music without bending to trends, guided instead by humility, belief, and an unshakable sense of self. Yet every legend carries wounds unseen. Behind the calm smile and steady voice lived battles fought far from the stage. Illness, betrayal, loss, and a relentless disease slowly stripping balance and strength from the man who once made millions sing. At 67, Alan Jackson faces not the fight for applause, but the harder fight for dignity as time presses forward. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. Every life that leaves a mark begins somewhere small. And for Alan Jackson, that beginning was not glamorous, but it was formative. He was born on October 17, 1958, in Newnan, Georgia, the youngest of 5 children in a working-class Southern family. Their home, once a converted tool shed, held more people than space. Winters slipped through thin boards, summers clung like heat trapped under tin. His father, Joseph Eugene "Daddy Gene" Jackson, spent long days as a mechanic at the Ford Motor Company, returning home with hands cracked from grease and labor. His mother, Ruth "Music" Jackson, worked in a school cafeteria, her days filled with steam, dishes, and quiet faith. Money was scarce, food sometimes uncertain, but gratitude was never absent. Ruth bowed her head each night and gave thanks anyway. Alan would later say that was where he learned what truly mattered, not possessions, but what holds a family together. As the only boy among 4 sisters, he learned early how to listen more than speak. Freight trains thundered past the house at night, and young Alan lay awake wondering if music might someday carry him somewhere beyond those walls. Comment or write Rip Joseph Eugene "Daddy Gene" Jackson to honor him. Sound became his refuge. Cicadas outside, rain on the roof, and the crackling radio carrying the voice of Hank Williams into the dark. Those songs felt like recognition, like someone else had already lived his feelings and left them behind in melody. By 12, Alan was working wherever he could, hauling lumber, repairing shoes, stacking shelves. Sweat replaced childhood, and silence became a companion. He never framed it as hardship. He framed it as learning how to keep going. At 16, his parents scraped together enough to buy him a used guitar, $50 worth of worn wood that changed everything. Night after night, he played until his fingers burned, writing songs meant for no audience but himself. Faith, longing, small-town truths quietly took shape in that cramped shed. Without knowing it, he was learning how to turn struggle into purpose, how to shape pain into something that could be shared. Comment or write Rip Roof Music Jackson to honor her. Dreams do not arrive fully formed. They demand endurance. In 1985, carrying little more than belief, Alan and his wife Denise packed their lives into a rattling U-Haul and left Georgia for Nashville. There was no safety net waiting. Their apartment was small and dim, the kind of place where walls echoed disappointment and hope lived paycheck to paycheck. Denise worked exhausting hours as a flight attendant while Alan took whatever work he could find, selling used cars, hauling lumber, building furniture. At night, alone with his guitar, he wrote songs no one had asked for, mailing demos that often returned unopened. Rejection became routine. Winters were cold, heaters failed, and there were moments when surrender stood close enough to touch. By day, he sorted mail at the Nashville network, handling letters addressed to names already famous: George Strait, Reba McEntire, Randy Travis. He was close enough to hear what hope sounded like, even if it wasn't meant for him yet. Comment or write rip Denise Jackson to honor her. Grace sometimes arrives quietly. On a flight, Denise recognized Glenn Campbell, a voice Alan had grown up hearing in the dark. Instead of asking for an autograph, she spoke of her husband, the man with unheard songs and calloused hands. Glenn offered no promises, only a manager's number, a small opening where none had existed. Alan called, and someone finally listened. He began writing for others, the pay small, but the affirmation immense. Years of hunger and persistence finally led to a turning point. In 1989, Arista Nashville signed him as their first artist. There was no celebration, only gratitude. The battered guitar that had survived every storm rested in his hands as he whispered thanks for one more day. Comment or write rip Glenn Campbell to honor him. The beginning was still unforgiving. His first single barely made a ripple, and doubt lingered heavily. But honesty has a way of finding its audience. Slowly, his songs reached people not as spectacle, but as confession. By the early 1990s, Alan Jackson's voice had become the sound of ordinary America, unpolished, steady, and real. He refused to chase trends, choosing instead to sound like where he came from. Success followed, but so did exhaustion. Long tours, constant travel, and the quiet weight of expectation pressed in. Yet, even as the industry shifted, Alan held firm, believing integrity mattered more than ease. Comment 67 or write rip Alan Jackson to honor him. Asterisk fame has a way of magnifying everything it touches, including the quiet fractures no one else can see. As Alan Jackson's songs spread across the country in the early 1990s, his face became familiar, his voice trusted, his image fixed as the symbol of uncomplicated American joy. Albums moved by the millions. A lot about living and a little about love, swept through homes and highways alike, and Chattahoochee became a summer anthem that seemed to belong to everyone at once. Awards followed, then more tours, then longer stretches away from home. On stage, Alan smiled easily. Backstage, fatigue settled into his bones. He performed hundreds of nights a year, sang through sickness, slept upright on buses that never truly stopped moving. When the applause faded, silence often felt heavier than the noise. Still, he refused to reshape himself for an industry leaning toward polish and pop. He stayed rooted, choosing authenticity over reinvention, even when it cost him comfort. Comment 67 or write rip Alan Jackson to honor him. In 1994. At the height of success, Alan made a decision that stunned those around him. He severed ties with longtime management, a move that cost him millions but restored something more fragile than money: control over his own life. It was not defiance. It was alignment. What followed silenced every doubt. Who I Am delivered multiple #1 singles and reaffirmed that sincerity could still triumph. Yet triumph leaves marks. By the late 1990s, exhaustion darkened his work. The songs grew heavier, not from bitterness, but from wear. He later admitted there were nights his hands shook so badly he struggled to tune his guitar. Success, he learned, was not a crown. It was a weight carried quietly. Comment 67 or write rip Alan Jackson to honor him. Then came a moment that stopped time itself. In September 2001, as the nation reeled in grief and disbelief, Alan woke before dawn with a melody that would not let him rest. Where were you when the world stopped turning emerged not as a performance, but as a question spoken on behalf of millions who could not yet speak? When he sang it live, there were no effects, no distractions, just a man and a guitar bearing the weight of collective sorrow. The room stood frozen. The song earned awards and acclaim, but more importantly, it offered comfort. Alan would later say it felt given, not written. In that moment, his role shifted from entertainer to witness, a voice steady enough to hold grief without dressing it up. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. As the years passed, his professional life soared even higher. Tours generated tens of millions. Album sales crossed 50 million worldwide. His net worth climbed, but the markers of wealth never became his measure of success. He still returned home to Franklin, Tennessee, mowing his own lawn, writing songs by hand, grounding himself in routines untouched by fame. Yet while the world saw a man at the peak of his craft, his private life was beginning to fracture under the strain. Long absences, constant travel, and emotional distance eroded the foundation he and Denise had built over decades. The same devotion that fueled his career slowly starved his marriage of presence. Comment or write Rip Denise Jackson to honor her. Alan and Denise's love story began long before spotlights and stages. They met as teenagers in Georgia, two small-town souls drawn together by something gentle and enduring. They married young in December 1979 with borrowed suits, borrowed rings, and a promise made almost entirely of faith. In those early years, they shared cramped apartments, flickering lights, and dreams whispered over candlelight when the power went out. Denise believed in Alan's music before the world ever heard it. She worked long hours, carried the weight of stability, and spoke his name in rooms where he could not yet enter. But by the late 1990s, the distance had grown unbearable. In 1998, the strain finally broke. Alan admitted to a betrayal that shattered trust and left their marriage hollowed by pain. Denise left quietly, leaving behind a note and a silence that no award could fill. Comment or write Rip Denise Jackson to honor her. The aftermath was brutal in its stillness. Alan returned to a house filled with reminders of a life he had nearly lost. Guitars sat untouched. Days passed without music. He later admitted it was hard to sing when the song inside him was gone. Denise turned inward, leaning on faith not to excuse pain, but to survive it. Forgiveness came slowly, not as an act of weakness, but as a hard-won freedom. Alan entered counseling, stripped of pride, writing apologies instead of lyrics. They met again without promises, letting silence do the work words could not. On Christmas morning in 2001, Denise handed him a small box containing the keys to a car he once sold to build their life together. The gesture broke him open. It wasn't about the car. It was about choosing each other again, imperfect and real. Comment or write Rip Denise Jackson to honor her. Their reconciliation did not restore innocence. It forged depth. Love became quieter, steadier, shaped by grace rather than romance. They learned that surviving together mattered more than appearing whole. Years later, Alan would reflect that fire had tested them, but faith had given them water to begin again. Their marriage stood not as a fairy tale, but as a testament written in scars, reminding others that love survives not by avoiding pain, but by walking through it hand in hand. Comment or write Rip Denise Jackson to honor her. Just as life began to feel settled again, another trial arrived, one that ignored fame entirely. In 2010, Denise was diagnosed with cervical cancer. The word landed with devastating finality. Alan canceled everything, choosing presence over performance. Hospital rooms became their world. Nights passed under sterile lights as he slept in plastic chairs, holding her hand while machines whispered through the dark. He prayed without words, sang softly not for escape, but for companionship. Treatments drained her strength, stole her hair, and dimmed her smile, yet something deeper returned between them. Faith, thinned by years of distance, took root again. When remission finally came, Alan wept openly. Survival felt like resurrection. Comment or write Rip Denise Jackson to honor her. **** after surviving betrayal and illness. Alan Jackson believed he understood loss. He was wrong. Grief has a way of returning in quieter, heavier forms, especially when it reaches backward into childhood and erases the people who built the ground beneath you. No matter how far Alan traveled or how brightly Nashville burned, his heart remained anchored to that small shed in Georgia. And one by one, the figures who shaped that world began to fade into memory. His father, Joseph Eugene "Daddy Gene" Jackson, had always been a man of action rather than words. A mechanic by trade, his hands carried the permanent scent of oil and iron, proof of decades spent fixing what others wore down. When money was scarce and music lessons impossible, Daddy Gene quietly gathered coins and thin savings to buy his son a $50 guitar. He never announced belief. He demonstrated it. That single act echoed through every note Alan would ever play. Comment or write ripped Joseph Eugene "Daddy Gene" Jackson to honor him. As Alan's career rose, his father never moved closer to the spotlight. He remained on the same porch in Newnan, pride steady and unspoken. He did not brag. He did not ask for recognition. Yet when Alan sang about small towns, work-worn hands, faith, and family, his father's presence stood behind every lyric. In 2000, when Daddy Gene passed away, something fundamental shifted. Alan returned to Georgia and stood inside the modest church where he once sang as a boy. There were no cameras, no applause, only a son facing the silence left by the man who taught him how to endure without complaint. Losing his father did not arrive loudly. It arrived as weight, as if something essential had been removed from the earth beneath him. That night, unable to sleep, Alan picked up the same guitar his father had bought and began to play. What emerged became Drive for Daddy Gene, a song about childhood rides, lessons passed quietly, and love that never needed words. To Alan, it was not a hit. It was a farewell. Comment or write ripped Joseph Eugene "Daddy Gene" Jackson to honor him. Years later, grief returned again, this time wearing gentleness instead of grip. Ruth Music Jackson, Alan's mother, passed away in Newnan, and her absence felt like home slowly dissolving. Where Daddy Gene taught endurance, Ruth taught tenderness. By day she worked in a cafeteria, but by spirit she was a gospel singer whose hymns filled their house and anchored their faith. She taught Alan to bow his head before every performance, reminding him that humility mattered more than applause. She never cared about awards. She cared that he sang what was true. When she died, Alan returned once more to Georgia, to the church where she had led the choir. Her Bible still rested in the pew, pages worn thin by years of devotion. During the service, when the choir sang her favorite hymn, Alan tried to join in and couldn't. Grief closed his throat. That sorrow found its way into music not meant for charts, but for healing. Precious Memories began as a private goodbye, recorded simply because he wanted to make something for his mother. When it was finally shared, it reached far beyond their family, comforting millions. Through that album, Ruth's quiet faith became a legacy. Comment or write rip Ruth Music Jackson to honor her. Losing both parents altered Alan's understanding of life. Youth is spent trying to prove something, he later reflected. Adulthood teaches you that the people you wanted to make proud are no longer here to see it. What remains is their love living through you. For a time, Alan believed he had walked through grief's deepest valley. Then life reached forward and took something from his present. In 2018, tragedy arrived without warning. Ben Seligman, only 28, newly appointed as a district attorney and newly married to Alan's daughter, Maddie, died after a sudden accident during a family trip. Their love was young, full of plans not yet lived. For 12 endless days, the family waited beside a hospital bed, measuring time by machines and prayer. Alan held Ben's hand and whispered hope into the silence. When Ben passed, the house collapsed into stillness. Maddie became a widow before her life had truly begun. Alan, who had sung a nation through heartbreak, found himself without a song. Some losses, he admitted, cannot be carried by melody. Comment 28 or write Rip Ben Seligman to honor him. In the months that followed, the guitar stayed untouched. Even Alan's voice felt too fragile to trust. Denise stayed close to their daughter, holding her through nights when grief refused language. Alan stayed too, not because he had answers, but because presence was all he could offer. Pain that deep cannot be fixed. It can only be shared. Maddie eventually turned to writing, shaping her loss into words that honored love rather than erased it. Alan wrote the foreword himself, every line carrying a father's quiet devotion. Ben's name continued to be spoken at the table, not as a memory, but as a presence. When Alan finally returned to the stage, he sang differently, slower, bearing a weight no chart could measure. Grief, he learned, never leaves. It only changes shape. Comment or write Rip Ben Seligman to honor him. After a lifetime of loss, life delivered one final, deeply personal trial. This time, it did not take someone he loved. It reached inside him instead. For years, the signs were subtle. A tremor in his legs. A hesitation before stepping into the light. He blamed exhaustion, the cost of decades on the road. Then doctors named it Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, a rare hereditary nerve disorder. It had lived quietly in his family line. His father had known it. One of his sisters had known it. But Alan's case progressed further, slowly stealing balance and strength. There was no cure, only management, only time. The disease turned standing into negotiation, movement into risk. Yet when he spoke of it, there was no bitterness, only resolve. He had buried parents. He had buried a son-in-law. This loss was different. It was intimate, gradual, a daily reckoning with his own body. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. As the illness settled deeper into his body, Alan Jackson learned a new kind of courage, one that had nothing to do with applause or endurance in the public eye. Each morning became a careful negotiation with balance. Each step carried awareness where instinct once lived. Fans began to notice him holding the microphone stand longer, leaning into it as if it were an anchor. He never framed it as weakness. He framed it as adaptation. Some nights he sang seated. Some nights the guitar felt heavier than it ever had. Yet when the lights dimmed and the first chord rang out, something inside him remained untouched. He once said that standing on stage, even now, was the only place he still felt whole. The disease could slow his body, but it could not quiet the voice that had been shaped by faith, loss, and resolve. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. In 2021, Alan chose honesty over silence. He spoke openly about his condition, not to invite sympathy, but because truth had always been the foundation of his relationship with his audience. He explained that the disease had been affecting him for years and that it would continue to progress. There was no drama in his words, no self-pity, only acceptance. Denise stood beside him, steady in ways illness could never reach. Their daughters watched with pride and quiet grief as their father shared another vulnerable chapter of his life. Messages poured in from people facing their own physical battles, people who saw in Alan's perseverance a reflection of their own hopes. His struggle became a testimony, not of suffering, but of presence. Comment or write Rip Denise Jackson to honor her. Despite everything, Alan did not disappear. In 2022, he returned to the road one final time with Last Call, One More for the Road. It was not framed as a goodbye soaked in sorrow, but as a thank you offered in gratitude. He walked onto the stage more slowly now, tipped his hat, and smiled softly, as if acknowledging both what had been and what still remained. When he sang Remember When, his voice cracked and thousands of voices rose to carry the song back to him. In those moments, the exchange became complete. He had spent his life giving pieces of himself away through music, and now the audience returned them, note by note. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. Today, Alan lives quietly in Franklin, Tennessee. The pace of his days has slowed, reshaped by illness and age, but not emptied of meaning. He writes lyrics by hand because patience is now part of the process. He strums in the morning light when his strength allows. He believes each breath is borrowed grace. This, he says, is not an ending, only a different way of living. His life now reflects what his music always taught, that value is found not in noise, but in truth. Comment 67 or rate Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. Measured by industry standards, Alan Jackson's career stands among the most successful in American music. More than 50 million albums sold worldwide. Tours that once generated tens of millions of dollars annually. Songwriting royalties that continue long after the road has ended. His estimated net worth, often reported around $150 million, was never built through shortcuts or spectacle, but through consistency and restraint. Yet he has said many times that money was never the destination. To him, wealth only mattered if it purchased dignity, time, and the freedom to walk away when the body asked him to. In that sense, his greatest fortune was not financial. It was surviving success with his values intact. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. That philosophy is visible in how he lives. His home outside Franklin sits on land chosen for peace rather than display. Wide porches invite quiet mornings. Warm wood interiors bear the marks of family life rather than excess. Fireplaces glow more often than screens. Light pours through windows that look out onto open land and trees that do not care about fame. Over the years, he has owned homes tied to memory instead of status, including time spent along the Florida coast and property in Georgia, close to the red clay that shaped him. These were never trophies. They were shelters, places to heal, to gather family, to rest when the road finally slowed. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. Even his passions remain grounded. Alan has never chased modern luxury. Instead, he has surrounded himself with classic American vehicles, restored trucks and cars that echo an era defined by hands-on work and honest wear. A 1955 Ford Thunderbird holds particular meaning, not as an indulgence, but as a reminder of family and sacrifice. These machines are not status symbols. They are timekeepers, holding stories of where he came from and who he refuses to forget. In an industry driven by constant reinvention, Alan chose preservation. He chose to age honestly. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. At the center of everything remains family. Alan and Denise, married since 1979, share a bond forged not by ease but by endurance. Betrayal survived. Illness confronted. Grief endured together. Their 3 daughters, Maddie, Alexandra, and Dani, carry forward the quiet strength modeled in their home. Alan is now a grandfather, a role he approaches with awe rather than pride. Fame, he has said, never impressed his children the way presents did. Beyond his own walls, his generosity has flowed quietly for decades through disaster relief, faith-based causes, education, and giving that rarely seeks recognition. To him, charity was never about being seen. It was about being useful. Comment or write Rip Denise Jackson to honor her. As illness narrowed his circle and age slowed his body, Alan did not vanish. He distilled. He still writes when strength allows. He still plays when his hands cooperate. He still answers letters from fans who say his songs help them endure divorce, illness, loss, or long nights of doubt. If his music helped someone stay standing, he once said, then it did its job. That belief defines him now more than any award ever could. At 67, Alan Jackson no longer chases the spotlight. He guards what remains: his faith, his family, his voice. His story reminds us that success is not measured by how loudly the world applauds, but by how much of yourself you still recognize when the noise fades. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. ****. Legends are often remembered for the moments when the lights were brightest, but the truest measure of a life is revealed when the stage grows quiet. In this season, Alan Jackson stands not as a figure chasing relevance, but as a man who has already given what he had to give. His voice, still steady even as his body weakens, carries decades of faith, endurance, and honesty. Every note now feels deliberate, not because he is reaching for effect, but because each one matters. He understands something few do while still living inside their legacy, that the song is not meant to outlast the singer, but to walk beside those who need it. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. Behind every public figure stands a private rhythm, and for Alan, that rhythm is shaped by routine and restraint. Mornings come quietly in Franklin, Tennessee. There is no rush toward applause, no calendar filled with demands. He moves carefully now, respecting the limits his body sets, finding peace in the spaces between effort. He writes slowly by hand because patience has become part of the craft. When he plays, it is not to rehearse for crowds, but to remain connected to the gift that defined his life. In these moments, music returns to what it always was for him, not a career, but a companion. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. Faith, once learned in a humble Georgia shed, has returned as an anchor rather than a shield. Alan no longer asks why life has taken so much. He asks instead how to remain grateful for what remains. Prayer is quieter now, less about hope for change and more about acceptance. He has walked through fire enough times to know that survival is not proof of favor, only evidence of grace. Loss did not make him bitter. It made him careful with what he loves. Comment or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. His music continues to move through the world without him chasing it. Songs written decades ago still find new listeners, still sit beside people during long drives, late nights, hospital rooms, and moments of reflection. He once said he never wanted to sound bigger than life. He wanted to sound like it. That choice is why his work remains. Trends passed him by, but truth stayed. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. There's a quiet symmetry to his story. A boy raised in scarcity grows into a man who never hoarded excess. An artist surrounded by praise learns to value silence. A performer who filled arenas discovers that presence at home matters more than any ovation. The illness that now slows him has not taken his identity. It has clarified it. He is no longer defined by how long he can stand, but by how faithfully he remains himself. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. When people speak of Alan Jackson years from now, they may list numbers, albums sold, awards earned, tours completed. But those who truly know his work will remember something quieter. They will remember how his songs felt like conversations rather than performances. How they never demanded attention, only honesty. How they carried grief without spectacle and joy without apology. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. His legacy does not live only in music halls or record collections. It lives in kitchens where couples dance slowly to remember when, in trucks where Chattahoochee still plays on summer afternoons, in living rooms where Where Were You brings back memories of a nation holding its breath together. These moments are not monuments, they are memories, and they are where legends truly reside. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. As time continues forward, Alan Jackson remains exactly what he always was, A man shaped by faith, grounded in humility, and unwilling to pretend. He does not need reinvention. He does not seek rescue from age or illness. He accepts life as it comes, believing that dignity is found in honesty and peace and surrender. His voice, though no longer chasing stages, still carries weight because it carries truth. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. If his music has ever sat beside you in joy or grief, if it has ever helped you endure something you did not think you could carry, then you already understand his legacy. It was never about fame, it was about companionship. A reminder that ordinary lives matter, that faith can be quiet, and that love often speaks in simple words. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him. And when the final silence eventually arrives, it will not be empty. It will be filled with echoes of songs sung honestly, prayers whispered in the dark, and a life lived without surrendering its soul. Legends do not vanish when the music fades. They remain in the lives they helped hold together. Alan Jackson's song is still playing. Comment 67 or write Rip Alan Jackson to honor him.